Christmas Eve 2019, and we've got a big gift for you today. Coming straight from Lenny Melnick Fantasy Sports Network. It's not just me, it's Arnie. It's Kevin Hastings. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Arnie. Merry Christmas.
And Merry Christmas to you. Now, we're covering this from coast to coast this morning, would you say?
Absolutely. About as far away as you can get and still be in the United States.
Kevin in Hawaii. I'm in North Carolina. This just shows you that the power of internet is very strong in the United States of America on Christmas Eve 2019. We got a lot of baseball to talk about, Kevin. You ready to dig in?
Absolutely. Let's do this.
How about the signing yesterday? Cleveland getting Cesar Hernandez, the second baseman who was previously with Philadelphia. And what do you think that may do with the Frankie Lindor discussion? Because certainly he's still a Cleveland Indian as we look at it on Christmas Eve 2019.
I think it's going to temper things a little bit, as Lenny brought up earlier this morning. I think it's probably an upgrade over what they had at the Keystone last season. Jason Kipnis not producing as he did when he was younger and not playing as often as he did when he was younger. And Cesar Hernandez he's a baseball player. He's not exciting. He's probably more exciting for us fantasy players than for a typical baseball fan, but he can contribute, absolutely.
Well, I love him at the top of the order, and you hit on it. Kipnis has just been not good at all the last 2 or 3 seasons. And, they keep playing him, and they tried him in the outfield. They kept him at second base, and then, of course, he was relegated to the bench. They bring up Freeman last year to play some second base. It's just been a haphazard situation for Cleveland at second. And now with Hernandez, you bring in a guy who's 29 years old, 279 batting average, 14 homers, 71 RBIs last year, probably top of the order. Where do you think he falls? Right there with Lindor for sure, and Ramirez in the top 3, I would think. And now Cleveland got to be thinking, hey, we got an offensive player we can put in the lineup.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I would have thought the exact same thing, but I'm looking at Roster Resource, their lineup projection right now, and they actually have Lindor, Mercado, and then Santana and Ramirez, and Cesar Hernandez hitting 6th behind Franmil Reyes. And I could really see him slotting in anywhere in that top of the bottom half like they have him, or at the top of the order up there, even if you just moved him to the top and moved everybody down a spot, and you still had Lindor and Mercado's speed at the top of the lineup with the power of Carlos Santana, and then, of course, Ramirez and Reyes with power in the middle of the lineup. They have some options here. It's going to be interesting to see how they do insert him into that lineup.
It certainly adds length, doesn't it? Either way, you add length to that order, and I think the price for Frankie Lindor just went up.
Absolutely. I agree. I think the price was already high. I think that has as much to do with the trade talks probably going to diminish as much as this signing. We heard they were asking for Gavin Lux. The Dodgers aren't giving up Lux.
No.
And that's the price tag we know right there. So they're going to be asking for similar from other teams that are interested. It's prudent to put it out there. Yeah, we consider trading Francisco Lindor if we get this, but not going into full-blown sell mode to where they're going to not get as high as a return as most people would expect, like our perception is in the Kluber trade.
Right. Well, my thing with Frankie Lindor, Kevin, is this, and tell me what your thinking is. I haven't heard Lindor say anything. I haven't heard there be any discussion, hey, if I'm traded, I'll sign long term. He's going to be a free agent in a couple of years no matter what. And the thing I'm looking at here, a team goes and invests in Frankie Lindor. Sure, he's a great shortstop. Sure, he's the top, probably shortstop in the major leagues right now, or at least arguably that. But who's to say he sticks? So let's say the Dodgers send 3 or 4 prospects over to Cleveland, for example, and then Lindor in 2 years decides, hey, I think I want to skip town. I think I want to go back to the American League. You're investing a whole lot in the short term, unless, of course, you can sign the guy long term. I've just not heard any of that discussion. I've been trying to find it. Have you read anything on that? Because otherwise, I'm not in on Lindor if I can't sign him long term.
Right, and I don't think most players these days are signing the extensions like you're referring to, especially with 2 years to go on their contract, and someone like him that's going to get paid as much as he will in these final 2 arbitration years. I think I saw he's probably looking at close to $20 million for 2020 and $25 million in 2021. So you're giving up top prospects in order to pay someone else $45 million and only have them for 2 years. You'd have to be somebody really on the brink, and you think he's going to put you over the top. And we know that's usually pitching is what puts you over the top, even with a great offensive player and defender like Lindor is.
You know, Atlanta, great idea when they signed Albies and Acuna Jr. to those long-term deals. I mean, they locked them up for, several years. Great move on their part. The antithesis of that is Frankie Lindor. And do you really think L.A. is the Dodgers are thinking that Lindor is that chip to put them over the top? Because my opinion, Dodger pitching is weaker this year, 2020, than it's been in the past. I guess they're trying to add the offense if they're going to make the trade. But to me, it makes more sense to go out and get a pitcher. Of course, that market is dry now. And David Price is the only pitcher they're being talked about in terms of making trades. What's your thought on David Price? I mean, is he the savior? I think he's hurt all the time, but that's just my take.
I think somebody might get a good deal similar to, once again, the Corey Kluber deal that the Rangers got due to the injury history that Price has. But he's still owed a lot of money. And the advantage that teams have, conversely to the Lindor we were just talking about, is that teams know the Red Sox do want to dump some of that salary. So he might be more affordable as far as what you have to give up, and then willing to take that risk with the injury. It's, like Lenny was saying this morning, 107 innings, I think it was, in 2019. He's getting paid a lot of money to only go out there and pitch a little over 100 innings.
Yeah, I read something where in the last 5 years he's only thrown 160 innings or over that once. That's a lot of money, isn't it? Absolutely it is. I can pull it up right now really quickly. Yeah. And while you're doing that, Toronto had the guy in 2015. A lot of people forget that. Toronto won the American League East in 2015. Not that long ago. A lot of hard times have hit since, but now they got all these young players. The Biggios, the Guerreros, the Lourdes Gurriel, and of course, one of Phil Chaplin's favorites, Bichette. But now they add Ryu. They talk about adding Price. If Price is healthy and can give them the innings, it is interesting to think about what Toronto can throw out there in 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's actually thrown more innings than I recalled when I have his numbers in front of me. Just 2 years ago in 2018, he had 176 innings and a 3.58 ERA with the Red Sox. And it was only 2016 that he went 230. But 2 of the last 3 years, he has that 74 innings and 107 innings that we talked about. So the health is an issue. And he's 34 years old with 3 years left on this contract and owed over $90 million. That's a lot of money for a guy getting to that age. You know, not
Ouch.
everybody is Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer or even Charlie Morton. So it's going to be tough. They're not going to get a big haul if they trade David Price, if they're giving away the entire contract as well.
And I'm, a little surprised I've not heard the Angels mentioned in that discussion. The Angels looking to add some pitching. They of course added Rendon. That's a big splash, but really nothing major. I mean, I don't consider Tehran an ace. I just don't. I don't consider the pitching they've added one or twos. And Price could certainly, although not a one anymore, I think he's at least a two if he's healthy. But I haven't read anything that the Angels are in on David Price.
Yeah, I haven't either, and I'm not all that surprised. I think that, you know, they have Tehran, Heaney, Griffin Canning. A lot of people are really high on him. Shohei Ohtani, who I don't like for fantasy baseball, but I think he's the most exciting player in baseball to watch play. We've heard that he may be limited early in the season, and that's not surprising coming off of Tommy John. But they have some pieces here, and I think, you know, we've seen it in the past. If teams have a staff that they can piece together for much of the regular season and just get themselves into a spot, where they can make a postseason run and then go get that ace at the deadline. You know, me as a Kansas City Royals fan, that's exactly what they did in 2015 when they went and got Johnny Cueto at the deadline.
Right.
And then he pitched magnificently in the postseason. He wasn't even very good in the regular season, but that's not what they got him for. They were on their way to the postseason. They needed somebody to step up in the postseason, and he did. And we know the Angels have all the money in the world. They've done it in the past. It hasn't worked out well for them with Josh Hamilton and even Albert Pujols. But that is the way they're looking at this. If they could be even in a spot for a wild card and then go get an ace.
And certainly they have the money, the resources. And the thing is, I was looking the other day, Kevin, and if I'm not, I may be incorrect on this, but I think I'm correct. Of the top 100 prospects in baseball, the Angels have one, and that's Joe Adele. And he's, I think, fifth ranked. Some sources may have him higher, but I think he's ranked fifth. So there's not a lot of depth in the minor league system in terms of number of top-ranked prospects for Anaheim. I guess if they look to trade, they've got to try to package somebody in the minor leagues and somebody at the major league level too. And there's just not, in my opinion, a lot of wheeling and dealing available there for Anaheim. So I guess they'll get resourceful, and we'll see what they do. But they certainly have. I applaud them for getting Rendon. I think that's a great move, and it settles a lot of issues on their infield. Interesting to see what they do the next few months. It's been a great offseason, though. Can you believe it? I mean, last year we sat here with nothing going on at Christmas, and this year, look at all the presents we've already been able to open.
Oh, it's been amazing. Absolutely amazing. And what's most exciting to me is I think of the first 11 guys that signed for more than $30 million this offseason, 8 of them went to teams that were not in the postseason last year. And we even have teams like the Tigers. The Tigers aren't going to be contenders this year, but adding C.J. Cron and Jonathan Scope makes them a better baseball team. The Kansas City Royals, even Maikel Franco. People are down on Maikel Franco, but he is a huge upgrade in their lineup. Even at what he has already done, without even some of the improvement that some still hope for him being 27 years old. And the Blue Jays, we know they have exciting players coming up through their system, and they're adding to it. They're adding a Travis Shaw. You talked about the Angels, the Texas Rangers making moves. I absolutely love it. We're going to have a lot more competitive baseball in 2020. It's going to be so much more fun to watch.
And now your Royals have Yankee ace Chance Adams. You gotta love that trade. I mean, he's got a good arm. I saw him pitch last year for Scranton, and I think in return the Yankees get an infielder with a lot of great defense potential, but not a lot of offense. But I think it was just unloading Chance Adams, and that's the type of moves the Royals love to make, don't they?
Yeah, and they hadn't in the last couple of years. They've done it in the past and kind of got away from it the last couple of years. I saw some of the Royals beat writers really excited about this move because the Yankees had a roster crunch. They had to let somebody go that if they weren't on their 40-man roster limit, they would have kept him. He's still only 25 years old. But they had a roster crunch with the 40-man roster, so they kind of took what they could get. They're hanging on to Clint Frazier at the moment. That adds to that roster crunch because he doesn't seem to really be in their immediate plans for the future. So taking advantage of that with a guy that has all the potential in the world still and just hoping that maybe they can tap into it. It's the kind of moves that teams in the position the Royals are in need to make. And it's not going to work out every time, but hopefully it does with Chance Adams.
And in the division, one of my favorite teams for 2020 and beyond, the White Sox, they go and they add Keuchel this past weekend. I think is a huge move. They make the Mazzara trade with Texas. I watch these guys play at the minor league level regularly at high A ball. I've seen Jimenez. I've seen Luis Robert. I've seen Madrigal. I've seen all these guys go through. I just feel like the White Sox are really a playoff team this year. And I love the moves they've made in the offseason. And so, Cincinnati Reds, I want to hear your input on that. What do you think about the Redlegs, and are they done with the moves for 2020?
I like what the Reds are doing. I think they still may get one of these outfielders that are still available, Castellanos or Yasiel Puig coming back, or another one of these guys that are still available in the outfield. But as far as a lineup going into 2020, it was shocking to us. We thought they were going to have this great offense in 2019, and their offense struggled, and we thought the pitching would be the side that would struggle, and the pitching was great, and they've even added to that pitching staff with a guy like Wade Miley, who was amazing until September in 2019. And, with adding Mike Moustakas and to the team that should have been better than it was last year. I was doing the outfield profiles for the draft guide we'll have coming out here next month, and it's these guys, Jesse Winker, if they can platoon him, I didn't realize how bad Jesse Winker was against lefties until I dove into it. But if they get somebody to platoon with him so he doesn't have to face lefties, Joey Votto's underlying numbers were right in line with his career numbers last year. He hit the ball as hard as about anybody in baseball, and they just didn't go out of the ballpark like they had been in the past. So he might be a bounce back candidate. And, Aquino, the surprise that he was late in the season, they have him penciled in there. Nick Senzel, they're going to have him go to center field or remain in center field, I should say. This is a team that if they, add another outfielder, I think is going to be I think they're the favorites to win the Central. What do you think?
I love the Reds. I love you saying that. There's 2 votes for the Reds. I love the Irvin kid. Remember, he played some. He was a platoon guy, and maybe there's your platoon right-handed bat.
That's the way they have it here on Roster Resource right now. Exactly.
I love your idea there. I think the Reds with and Moustakas, okay, and I'm going to really make you smile here because I'm talking about a Kansas City Royal, Hall of Fame, Kansas City Royal, retired number, Kauffman Stadium. I can see it happening because they win the World Series with him, but I'm joking a little bit. But what a talent, what a heart. and the guy plays with broken hands and still hits home runs. I've had him on my fantasy team the last 2 years. I love me some Moustakas. And that kind of fight is the kind of player I think every team loves to have in their clubhouse. And so they add him at second base, a position where they have been not good. And now, I mean, I know he's probably not the best second baseman in the world, but he's adequate, and he's going to hit 35, 40 homers in that ballpark.
Yeah, and you said it exactly right, of the presence he brings to the clubhouse. That Royals team was so much fun to watch. And I remember being at a game in 2014. They were first in the wild card race. They were playing the Red Sox. It was the end of August, kind of the doldrums of summer. It was a day game. It was hot. They were losing by 3 or 4 runs. The team just looked down. But Mike Moustakas at third base on every pitch was in the game. He was talking to his pitcher, and finally he walked to the pitcher's mound so that the rest of the infield would follow him in for a little meeting between hitters and tried to pump everybody up, and he was a guy at that time that had been sent down to the minor leagues earlier in the year. But when he came back up, he just immediately took over a leadership position. So you're exactly right with bringing that aspect to the team.
And the thing is, when you have a player who's the heart and soul of the team, sure, you want the numbers to be good, no doubt. But Moustakas reminds me, I go way back here, Kevin. When Kirk Gibson went over to the Dodgers in the late 80s, they didn't have leadership. And Gibby walks in, he takes over as a leader. He didn't have the best numbers in the world, but he was a presence in that lineup. The Dodgers win their only World Series in the last 30 years. Now the Reds, maybe I'm comparing too greatly here, but I see Moustakas as that kind of grinder type leadership, that Gibby type leadership that a lot of teams just don't have, but so desperately need. The Reds now have it. I think they win that division. And I go back to one of the most clever moves I never saw coming. Did you ever see last July Trevor Bauer going to the Reds?
No, absolutely not. And it was surprising. And he didn't perform that well. But I don't think we'll ever see 2018 out of Trevor Bauer again. I mean, he's never had an ERA under 4 in any other season. But I do think we're going to see a much improved Trevor Bauer and probably his second best season of his major league career this year. Kyle Bodie, the owner of Driveline Baseball, which Trevor Bauer credits with his development going into the 2018 season, is now in the minor league pitching development for the Cincinnati Reds. So they're having conversations, trying to get him back to what they did before. I think Trevor Bauer could be a surprise.
I totally agree, and I love the Reds bullpen. I didn't mean to make this a Cincinnati Reds featured show, but it's becoming that. But, I love the Reds bullpen. I think they're strong there. I think Milwaukee is not as good as they were. I don't think the Cubs are as good as they were. I'm not sold on the Cardinals repeating this year and their demise in the playoffs. I just think it's a great time for Cincinnati. And like you say, if the Vottos of the world can make a comeback, look for the Big Red Machine in 2020.
Yeah, I agree with that bullpen call for the Cincinnati Reds. A lot of people are kind of questioning whether Iglesias would keep the closer role, but they have at least 3 guys that are ready to step into that situation. They have a deep bullpen. I love Amir Garrett, and whether he's a closer or an effector, as Andrea likes to refer to these guys that come in high leverage situations earlier in the game. Lorenzen has the talent to close. Robert Stevenson, you're exactly right with that bullpen.
And now I want to ask you this, and we can talk about teams as examples of the rule, but I don't hear this talked about nearly enough fantasy-wise or reality-wise. I think that new rule this year where you've got to pitch the 3 outs as a reliever, or the three batters, excuse me. That's going to be a critical and significant change, not only in reality but also in fantasy. And if you look at these bullpens that have been so effective up till now, like a Tampa Bay, who bring in one pitcher to pitch to one hitter, the specialties, they're gone. And that's why I love the Reds. I love these teams with hard throwers who can go the three batters. And so I want to just throw this at you. I know this is really catching maybe off guard. Maybe you're thinking as I'm talking. But think about the players that are still out there, and think about the teams whose bullpens are already set. Who benefits from the rule? Who does not benefit from the rule? And I'll let you lead in with this one. I think this is exactly why the Yankees are so hot on Josh Hader. I think the new rule is a Hader type rule, don't you? I mean, he can get anybody out. And now teams have got to be looking at these Amir Garrett type players that you just brought up who can go to three batters because of the way he throws the ball.
Yeah, the Yankees were exactly who I was thinking about as you brought this up. And the reason guys like Josh Hader, I think, are going to become more valuable, not just to their major league clubs, but in fantasy baseball, is because they can go more than one inning. It's not just the number of pitches or the number of outs, but it's going in the dugout, sitting down, and then getting up and coming back out. Because they can come back out for that lefty that's leading off the inning. I think that's what's going to be huge. As far as fantasy goes, the problem with some of these guys is going to be we always count on these setup guys on our fantasy teams to give us some innings and some strikeouts with great ratios. Well, there's going to be quite a few intentional walks given.
Right.
These guys.
Right.
When they're alternating handedness in the lineup, and these guys are pitching in the seventh inning and they're starting with a clean inning so the bases are empty, they may be intentionally walking that second guy in the inning. And so the whip numbers aren't going to be as great as we've counted on in the past from some of these guys.
And I'm thinking about, for example, a player who's still out there, and you've seen him, I've seen him, Dellin Betances. Betances, who throws 100 miles an hour, coming off this, broken ankle, but teams are not quick to sign him. But daggone, I've watched a guy pitch. I mean, he can go against lefties, righties, and I'm really surprised he's not been picked up by somebody yet.
I'm really curious to know about his health. We only saw him for that 2/3 of an inning in 2019. And I haven't heard teams talking about him. I've heard Lenny talk about him. I've heard you talk about him. That's about it.
Yeah.
Nobody else is really talking about Dellin Betances. It makes me wonder if he's not ready.
Well, and maybe that's it, because that's the only thing to me that makes sense. Because as far as throwing the baseball in this new role of three batters, to me, if you have a healthy Dellin Betances, that's a no-brainer. I mean, I think he's as well as Hader. I mean, he's always pitched multiple batters. Even with the Yankees, I mean, years would go by, he would come in and pitch a whole inning. I mean, that's the way he rolls. And the Yankees not going after him, to me, says a great deal. What about you?
Yeah, most definitely. The Yankees have never been one to shy away from bringing a guy back when he reaches free agency. Even if they don't sign him to an extension before he officially becomes a free agent, they still work something out and bring him back. And you would think something like that would be going on, but nobody knows about his health better than the New York Yankees right now. And that may be putting other teams off as well. George is in the chat room, and he says that Dellin Betances is holding out for too much money at the moment as part of the issue.
All I've seen, and we've got Dale and George, good to see you guys in the chat room. Give us some feedback on this. The thing about Betances is the only team I've seen really interested so far has been the Mets. Am I missing something? The Yankees have not gone after him. The Mets were having some dialogue with him, apparently. I was reading on Twitter maybe a couple weeks ago. But $10 million for 1 year, I guess that's the scary point. And what I'm wondering is, will Dillon's price tag go down? And when the price tag goes down, how many more teams are in? I could see him going to San Diego. Boy, they'll sign a pitcher in a heartbeat, right? And they just signed one this past week. The kid that was over, let's see, who was it? Pierce Johnson, was over in Korea. Did you see his numbers from last year, Kevin?
I did. 14K per nine comes right to mind without even pulling him up on the screen.
Yeah.
I remember reading that yesterday. And some of these guys have gone over to Korea and Japan and straightened things out and come back and still performed at a high level coming back to the major leagues. Like Miles Mikolas is probably the example that comes to everybody's mind. But especially these guys that are moving into relief roles. As a Royals fan, Wade Davis is the best example. He came in over as a starter from Tampa Bay, and they tried him as a starter for a few starts before moving him to the bullpen. Drew Pomeranz. These guys, and not only do they get to go all out because they're only going to be pitching for an inning, maybe two, but the hitters haven't seen them, and they're not going to see them again. Some of these guys just are not good when they face hitters multiple times throughout a game. And when they can just go all out and they're only going to face the guy the one time, they have huge success.
I love your Pomerantz illustration, and that's what I wanted to dig into here. And Malpal's now in the chat room. Good morning, Malpal.
Perfect timing, Malpal.
He's always coming in right on time. Here's the thing about Pomerantz. You've got a starter and now in the bullpen. And I'm trying to work off this 3-batter rule. But in relief, I love that signing because you're only going to see him, 3 or 4 batters at the most. Now, if you play a team with a lot of lefties, I guess you can keep him in longer because he certainly has the arm strength to do it. But I love that signing of the bullpen with this new rule. That's the kind of move I'm thinking that can win you a championship. And there's got to be other players out there that are in that same category. We look at these free agents, and sure, Boris with his $1 billion signings, these are great players, but it's these little moves that make the big differences.
Yeah, most definitely. With Pomerantz and the youngster that just throws 100 miles an hour, Andres Munoz, and they have Matt Strahm in that bullpen. They just added Pierce Johnson. If he's anywhere close to what he was overseas, and they have a young pitching staff coming. We have guys like Garrett Richards and Zach Davies in their lineup right now, but Mackenzie Gore and Patino aren't too far away. They're going to have these young guys that they want to limit their innings when they're first getting thrown out there in the mix in MLB to have a deep bullpen, similar to your Yankees. It seemed like they had 7, 8 guys they could throw out there in relief last season. That's really going to help the young guys when they only got to go 4 or 5 innings.
Oh, and Mackenzie Gore, a North Carolina boy. I watched Mackenzie pitch. He's from a little town called Whiteville, North Carolina. Mackenzie pitched in the state championship, and it was like a man among boys. And this was not a big kid as a senior in high school. And the Padres picked him, I think, was it 4th in the draft that year? He's a great kid, great family makeup. I've met his mom and dad. And so, as they say in the country, he was raised right. I think he puts his values where they should be. San Diego's got an ace in the making there. And that's why I'm just thinking of Dellin Betances on that team. When you look at the Padres' everyday lineup, first of all, do you think Machado picks it up from 250 batting average this year, Kevin?
I do. I think it was we've seen some guys have more success changing teams recently, but I think it was our old school thinking that when guys change teams, go to a new environment, especially when they change leagues, that first season can have a lot of question marks. I remember when Justin Upton first went to the Tigers. It wasn't his most recent move, but when he first made the transition to the American League, he wasn't very good in that first season. But then he bounced right back to what we'd always expect: 30 home runs, 90 RBIs, year in, year out, double-digit stolen bases. And when he went to the Angels, maintained it. So I kind of think that's probably what I think's going to happen with Manny Machado. I've never been a Manny Machado guy in fantasy baseball, but it was due to his price. He's dropping significantly this season, and I haven't drafted him yet in any leagues, but I'm going to start keeping my eye on Manny Machado.
Well, in every league I've ever drafted in, Machado's gone in the first 2 rounds. I mean, really.
Right.
And if you're in a 10-team, 12-team league and Machado drops to the 4th or 5th round, I think that's a steal. I really think that's a steal. I tell you, another player I think this year in fantasy is going to be dropping, Chris Bryant. Who knows where he's going to be playing, right? But if Bryant goes that low, that could be another steal. And I think in fantasy we try to, of course, buy low and hope for high. Those 2 guys, they're still young. They got some great bats. And I look for Machado and the Padres to really be a force. The other thing about San Diego, Kevin, you get a whole year, hopefully, of a healthy Fernando Tatis Jr.
Most definitely. And back to Machado, just really quick, in the early NFBC drafts, he's going 63rd on average. That's early 5th round in a 15-team league. In a 12-team league, that's 6th round. I'm starting to get interested in Machado. You're talking me into it, Arnie.
At 63, you've got to get him.
Already, but he's dropping even further than I had thought he was.
I'd get him around number 50. Think about that. Right. Think about his talent, his age, and now he's had a year there, and he's going to have Tatis in that lineup all year long. I just think if you could get Machado at number 50, if he's ranked 63rd, I think I'd draft him a round early and get him at 50. And wow, you got a player there that would have been a top 25 pick this past year.
Yeah, exactly. And you brought up Tatis. Tatis is going much higher, but maybe not as high right now as he, I think, will as we move into draft season. He's going middle of the 2nd round right now, but with speed being so coveted by fantasy players, I think he's going to creep up to earlier in the 2nd round, if not the end of the 1st round, which in some drafts he's being taken at the end of the 1st round.
So in looking at that, Kevin, who are the shortstops ranked ahead of Tatis at this point?
Right now, you have the 2 guys going right in the middle of the 1st round, typically in Francisco Lindor and Alex Bregman. And then you have Trey Turner, who everybody is after for his speed component and still having some power, right? The guys that have all that speed but aren't empty in power are going to be highly coveted. Trevor Story is right there with them. Those 4 guys are all firmly in the 1st round. And then Tatis is the top of the next group.
Do you like Story better than Tatis? I'm making it tough on you. If it was easy, everybody could do this. Right?
I like the potential of Tatis better than Story. I think I like Story for the consistency that he's already shown us for 3 seasons. But what's so interesting when you start talking shortstop is it's so deep. And I'm probably not going to have any of these guys on my fantasy teams because I got Didi Gregorius in the last draft I did in the 20th round of a 15-team league. Excuse me, 15th round of a 20-team league. I was thinking the wrong number there. 15th round of a 15-team league. And he's not at the level that these guys are. But when I'm taking the elite outfielders or even start thinking about starting pitching earlier in the draft and the numbers they give me and still get a guy like Didi Gregorius or Bo Bichette, who you brought up, it goes much later. Carlos Correa, I know all about the injuries, and I don't have him on any teams, but he's the 14th drafted shortstop right now. He was a first rounder. Shortstop is so deep that I probably won't end up with many of these guys on my teams because I'm just looking at other positions that early in the draft.
And one, I guess, would qualify at second base as well, but you got Gleyber Torres, who's also going to be
right there after Tatis on the ADP.
I mean, who do you like better, Tatis or Torres?
Probably Tatis, just for the speed component. I know Torres. We've seen his power. We haven't seen that from Tatis yet. But if I were to jump in the shortstop mix at that point in the draft, it would be because I was wanting to lock up some speed.
See, I like Gleyber better than I like Trevor Story. Now, I like Tatis better than Story. So I'm dropping Story down in my rankings. And I'm not saying he's
right there, real close.
Yeah, and I'm not saying he's chopped liver, don't get me wrong. But if I could pick between Tatis, Story, or Gleyber, and I know he's a Rocky, and Malpal's saying that, but I think from what I've seen, and I'm talking about consistency too. I mean, I'm just not a Story truther. I think he's going to have a bad year. And especially, I think the wild card there is, what do the Rockies do with Nolan Arenado? If they trade Arenado out of that lineup, that's a big bat that provides Story a lot of protection. And I think right now, though, if I'm taking those three, and it's close, but I got to take Tatis 1, Gleyber 2, and Story 3. That's me.
Yeah, they all definitely have their advantages there. I couldn't fault anybody. I could hear the argument for any of those guys around that area in the shortstop pool. It's amazing how deep it used to be. There were two shortstops, and it was almost like the catcher position is now. But is there a more puzzling team of what they have done the last couple of years and what it appears they may be doing than the Colorado Rockies?
None.
They have Desmond and these guys that they continue to play, and Brendan Rodgers and Garrett Hampson, and now I'm drawing a blank on the other young outfielder they have, Sam. I apologize, but they have all these young guys that are ready, and they're throwing guys like Ian Desmond out there on a daily basis, and Arenado's the guy you're going to trade? It makes zero sense to me.
None. And
they just locked him up. They just signed
exactly.
him.
And I drank the Garrett Hampson Kool-Aid last year. I don't know about you, but I drank it, and it tasted bad, and I spat it out, and I'm not going to drink it again. And what I learned from that bad Kool-Aid experience is, don't draft Rocky rookies in fantasy. Period.
It's horrible. Because, I was fortunate 3 or 4 years ago when I got Trevor Story for $2 in an auction, because for the sole reason I didn't know much about him except that he was going to be the starting shortstop at Coors Field. And so we get that feeling with all of these young guys, and Garrett Hampson, Brendan Rodgers, and these guys are more highly coveted prospects than Trevor Story was at the time. We just want him to get a chance to go play in that ballpark. And you're exactly right. You just can't do it right now. And when they do finally get the opportunity, they're probably going to flourish. And unfortunately, not for me.
And you're going back to your point, what started this discussion, which is how deep the shortstop position is for fantasy. if you were to pick a Hampson or a Rogers late and they qualify at the shortstop position, and this is another if, then Colorado starts that player at second base or outfield, maintaining shortstop eligibility, what a coup that would be in a fantasy draft. That's the other side of it. And so there's always that risk and reward. And so I think if I'm in a 25-player league, my 25th pick is probably going to be one of those Rockies just in case they hit, right?
It's worth a shot because you'll know right away. You'll know early in the season if they're getting their playing time, and if they're not, when you make your first free agent pickup, you have your guy to drop. And that's the thing that I'm trying to get better at is letting go of guys. When there's somebody out there available that can help you, can't just hang on to the hope anymore. You drafted them for that hope, but they're not getting the opportunity, or they're still more injured than we thought they were. For whatever reason, gotta let guys go and make that change.
I traded, oh my gosh, I had a rookie player. His name was Ronald Acuna Jr. 2 years ago. Okay? And if you remember Acuna Jr., the first half of the year, he just wasn't hitting home runs. Okay? He wasn't a bad player, but around the All-Star break, I got offered a trade for Acuna Jr., and I took it. I traded Acuna Jr. And I don't think in 2018 any player hit more home runs after the All-Star break than Ronald Acuna Jr. So I guess there are always, guidelines. Don't trade a superstar, Arnie. That was stupid. But then you pick up a player like this past year. There was a kid playing in Houston. He wore number 44 on his back. And I grabbed him as a free agent in June because I was hearing all this talk about this guy named Jordan Alvarez, right? And so I pick him up as a free agent, and voila, I get a Rookie of the Year return. So I guess it evens out, but it's when you make that move, and that's the key, and you just hit on it. When you drop a player, how long do you go? And I've got to the point where, depending on the player, I think a half a season is probably too long. I lost out on Acuna, but overall, I'm going to win those battles if I cut players. I think a third of the season is about my gauge. If after a third of the season they play 50 games, they're not producing, I got to move on because the fantasy season is going to be over in 100 games. That's just how I look at it. Maybe that's not a good approach, but that's the approach I've taken.
Yeah, maybe even less time than that. One of the biggest things I took out of First Pitch Arizona was Eno Saris of The Athletic, and he was paraphrasing a conversation that he had with Billy Beane of the Oakland Athletics, and I think this, as much as anything I've ever heard come from a Major League Baseball GM, this translates to fantasy more than anything. He said, you don't have time to wait on making these decisions. You have to jump and take the chances. You're going to be wrong many, many more times than you're right. You're going to be wrong. But the few times that you're right are worth it. You have to jump, because if you don't, somebody else is. You've got to make your decisions early, knowing that you're going to be wrong most of the time.
And that's the risk and reward, and that's what fantasy is about. I got to tell you this. Do you play fantasy football, Kevin?
I do. I made the playoffs in the 3 leagues I was in this season, but I was one and done in all 3 of them.
Well, can I just brag a little bit this morning? May I do that?
Absolutely.
Okay, well,
it's that time of year.
Well, I got to do it. I got to do it. I'm in the semifinals this past week. The finals are coming up this week. The semifinals pitted me, Arnie, against our friend Phil Chaplin. Yeah. And Chappie has a team, McCaffrey, Hill for Kansas City. I'm really scared. I go out last week and I pick up a quarterback off the waiver wire. His name is Daniel Jones. Okay? And Daniel Jones for the Giants, if you recollect, throws 5 touchdowns this past week. Picks me up 48 points. Bottom line, I beat Chappie by 6.5 points this week. And so, Chappie, always a fighter, always a player. It was a great win for me. Now I go on to the finals, but a great opponent. What was interesting is I look at the players in fantasy football that we both had who totally underperformed. Chappie had a guy, Tyler Lockett, 1.5 points. Ooh. James Conner for Pittsburgh, 3 points. Now, I equal that by starting Miller for Chicago, who scored 0.5 point, and Boone for Minnesota, who was the fantasy darling in the waiver wire ads this week, who got 2.5 points. Somehow I held on, but it was all because of Daniel Jones's 48. I move on. Thank you, Chappie. It was great beating you, and I look forward to doing it again in fantasy baseball. How's that?
Oh, congratulations. Chappie actually knocked me out. He was one of those one league that the Draft for Upside guys had going here on the site. And, Chappie eliminated me first round in that league.
So he's a great competitor, great player, and I enjoy every show I do with him. I've enjoyed this show too, Kevin. Thank you so much. I got to get out of here and get going, but this has been a great Christmas Eve present to me. I really appreciate you joining me this morning, and let's do this again soon. What do you think?
Absolutely. It was fun. I thank you as well, and Merry Christmas to everybody out there. Enjoy your Christmas Eve this afternoon and evening, and Christmas all day tomorrow, and I think all of us will be back here on Thursday.
That's the plan. So we'll see you then. Have a great holiday. Merry Christmas, everybody, and we'll see you on Thursday.